Carl, thank you very much, and congratulations again on your award. Our subject this afternoon is Leadership in Action, a deep dive into the personal style of two extraordinary executives. Leadership is a topic that generates great debate, discussion, and controversy. There are literally thousands of books and many philosophies and thoughts about what makes an effective leader. I believe that great leaders have vision and values. They do what's right, not what's easy. They are competitive, can build teams, confront the brutal facts, and have a bias for action. Yet at the end of the day, it is widely agreed that great leaders are not born, but made. Through years of trial and error, success and failure, great leaders hone their skills and adopt those characteristics they believe will most likely help them achieve their goals. During our session today, we will focus on the development of personal leadership. With us are two outstanding individuals, the Honorable William Graves, President and CEO of American Trucking Associations and former two-term governor of Kansas, and Joe Duty, President of Staples North American Delivery Businesses. We have asked them to discuss their personal view of what attributes make a great leader, what other leaders in history they admired and tried to learn and emulate from, the paths they took along the way, the challenges they face today, and the goals they aspire to achieve in today's environment. Following these two presentations, we're honored to have Tim Stratman. Many of you know Tim, the founder and president of Stratman Partners. He will conclude with a Q&A session where you will be able to interact with these gentlemen and/or add your own thoughts to the discussion. Wikipedia describes leadership as a process of social influence in which one person can enlist the aid and support of others in the accomplishment of a common task. And writings as far back as Plato's Republic have discussed the subject of leadership. Through the ages, many concepts have emerged, with three becoming more prevalent recently. So I'd like to just do a quick show of hands. How many believe that personality traits lead people naturally into a leadership role? In other words, that they're born with it. How many people believe that? A few hands. How many believe a crisis or important event will cause an individual to rise to the occasion, which brings out extraordinary qualities in an ordinary person? This sometimes is called the great events or situational theory. How many people believe that one? A lot of people. And third, how many people believe that people can choose to become leaders by learning leadership skills? This is actually the more prevalent view that's accepted today. But enough about theory, let's hear from the experts. First, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome the Honorable William Graves to SCLA. Bill Graves is President and CEO of American Trucking Associations, the national trade and safety organization of the United States trucking industry. Through its 50 affiliated state trucking associations, conferences, and other organizations, it represents an industry that delivers nearly 70% of the nation's freight before all branches and levels of government. Under his leadership, ATA has advanced several safety initiatives. It has proposed requiring that all new heavy trucks be equipped with speed limiters. It has also proposed a national speed limit of 65 miles per hour for all vehicles. And it supports efforts aimed at improving the safety of the trucking industry by requiring the use of electronic logs to monitor drivers' hours of service and establishing a national clearinghouse for drug and alcohol test results. Under Bill's leadership, ATA has also been a fierce advocate for improving our nation's infrastructure through the use of existing user fees, including for higher fuel taxes. Bill has also overseen ATA's efforts to promote the industry's record on sustainability, ranging from support for fuel economy standards for large trucks to promotion of the EPA's SmartWay program. In January 2003, Governor Graves completed his second term as governor of Kansas, capping 22 years of service to the state. He won re-election in 1998 by the largest margin in state history. Governor, we are delighted that you have accepted our invitation to be here today, and we look forward to your remarks. SCLA members, please welcome Bill Graves to the stage.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Don. Okay, now my apologies, because I know Don's heard this and maybe a couple of others, but I need to sort of set this stage. I'm elected in 1994. I've been the Secretary of State of Kansas for 2 terms. I'm 41 years old at the time. There has never been in the history of the state a Secretary of State elected to any higher office. So I'm sort of out in new, uncharted territory. And on January the 9th of 1995, which is my 42nd birthday, I'm inaugurated as the 43rd governor of Kansas. Now, I'm telling you, no matter how hard you try, it starts to kind of get in your head that you're a big deal. And that's the minute you're really starting to get yourself in trouble. I get invited to go home. I'm from Salina, Kansas. Most often people tell me that they've been through my hometown when they're driving west to go skiing in Colorado, is usually. But I'm invited back to my high school, Salina Central High School, to give the commencement address in May of '95. And so I'm still sort of caught up in this whole thing about being the governor. And what's really great is there's actually teachers still at the school who were there when I was there. And they're stunned at the prospect that I've become the governor of the state. So I'm bound and determined that I'm going to really, really impress everybody, and I work really hard on this commencement address, and I find a fabulous quote by an English author by the name of Joyce Carey. And the quote goes something like this: "It is the tragedy of the world that no one knows what they don't know. And the less a person knows, the more certain they are that they know everything." Well, in the process of delivering this statement, this quote during my commencement address, I refer to Joyce Carey as she said, she wrote. You know, I figured, what the heck, Joyce Carey. Well, I get done with my fine address, and this is a big auditorium. The graduating class is probably 350, I suppose, so it's a pretty good sized crowd. And as I'm leaving, literally like this staircase right there, is my senior English instructor, whose name is Ken Trickle. Mr. Trickle is standing there waiting for me, and he says, "Governor, that was a very fine address." And I said, "Well, that's, of course it was." And he said, "There's just one problem." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Joyce Carey is not a woman. Arthur Joyce Carey is a man." He said, "It's the tragedy of the world that no one knows what they don't know. And the less a person knows, the more certain they are that they know everything." I will never forget that story. And again, I tell it just about every time I'm at any kind of event like this, but it taught me a couple of important lessons. We are never as smart as we think we are. And I really have, and I guess this is true as you get a little bit older, I wasn't a great student, but today, now at my advanced age, I really am in love with learning, with reading, with doing a lot of things that I didn't do enough of when I was younger. And so, first of all, to all of you and to Dawn and everybody that puts this kind of an event together, these are important moments because these are an opportunity for you individually, collectively, to keep learning, to appreciate what you don't know about the professional path that you're following, and to do better, to grow and to continue and learn, which is important to all of us. I met Dawn up at Syracuse University, I don't know, has it been a year ago or 9 months ago, when Dawn was receiving an award from Syracuse University, the Salzburg Award, for his outstanding work in the logistics field. And he asked me to come down and talk to all of you about leadership. Now, if he asked me to talk about infrastructure or CSA or hours of service or all the trucking related things, I could probably do it, on the back of a napkin, but to be asked to come talk about leadership was a little bit of a challenge for me because it's not something I do every day. And I know that all of you in your own right are already quite successful, or you wouldn't be here. As a disclaimer, I think it's important to say, while I am currently the head of the American Trucking Association, first and foremost, I'm a huge fan and a believer in transportation and mobility in this country. I'm a big believer in multimodal solutions as it relates to freight, and I certainly understand and appreciate supply chain efficiencies. In fact, one of the highlights of my tenure in office was we passed a 10-year comprehensive transportation plan spending about $13 billion. And for a state like Kansas, $13 billion is a lot of money to spend over 10 years. We focused on roads and bridges. We focused on freight rail. We focused on general aviation, public transportation, hiking and biking. In fact, I know there are a few from the rail industry or involved in intermodal movements here. I remember having the chairman of Union Pacific Railroad, Dick Davidson, in my office at the Capitol in Topeka, and we were trying to figure out a strategy to solve a grade separation problem in Wichita, Kansas. And the dilemma we had is we needed the state to be a partner in the deal, we needed Union Pacific to be a partner in the deal, and we needed BNSF and Rob Krebs to be a partner in the deal. And by talking and working through the whole thing, we got it put together, and it's been a huge success, and I think one of the legacies I'm most proud of in my state. I have never forgotten my roots, and while not part of the introduction, it's important for you all to know my grandfather and my father were truckers. In fact, they became truckers because my grandfather was apparently not a very good farmer. And in the Depression, the Graves family lost the family farm outside Salina. Big family, like was commonplace in those days. 10 kids. My dad had 3 brothers and 6 sisters. Lost the family farm, had one old truck, managed to hang on to it, and because of the graciousness of a lot of their neighbors, allowing them to move products farm to market, an entity called Graves Truck Line was created, and by the 1980s, when the family business was sold, we were operating about 2,500 power units, employed about 3,000 people. This is still in the regulated days, so we did business in about 9 states, and we were a Teamster organization. And I can tell you, as the boss's son, I learned early on how to get along with people when I was working on the freight dock at night with all my Teamster friends. So I am a big believer in always remembering, your roots and where you've come from. It keeps everything in perspective. I was also a big believer in team. And I don't mean that word just in terms of athletics. I loved being involved in a myriad of activities as a young person in my early life. Everything from theater and debate, and obviously scouting was involved in that. My favorite theater story, I was working the crew backstage behind the set, and we had a scene, and I believe this play happened to be called Tea House of the August Moon, if there's any theater buffs out in the audience, but it involved a barnyard scene, kind of like in Korea, I think, and they needed a live goat. So somehow I was tasked with the responsibility of delivering the live goat onto the stage at one point during the presentation. What we didn't anticipate is that the goat had a certain, the goat didn't do well in front of live audiences. And the first night in the darkness, as I carried the live goat out, and there was this sense of all these people murmuring and making noises out in the seats, the goat did what goats would be known to do when they get really nervous. And so it gave me a great appreciation of being a team member and carrying the goat onto the stage. I have a strong belief in shared responsibility, which I learned from my father and his 3 other brothers. The secret of the success of our family business was that my dad, who never finished high school but was I think, a great leader, great manager, great with numbers, the brothers decided he ought to lead the management side of the equation. My Uncle Dwight loved facilities, loved to work out operationally how things should work, so they let Dwight run the operational side of things. My Uncle Jim loved and was fascinated with equipment. He spec'd everything, did all the buying, all the maintenance, and left alone. He did a fabulous job with equipment. And my Uncle John, well, he was the public relations guy. He was out and about and always stirring up business and sales for Graves Truck Line. Those four brothers as a team created a fabulous entity which I always hoped I'd be part of. And while that didn't turn out to be true, I feel blessed to have come full circle back to the industry working through the American Trucking Associations. As governor, I will just say that my philosophy was always follow the path that gets the job done. Do whatever it takes to be successful. And at age 42, I inherited about a $9 billion budget, and I was directly or indirectly responsible for managing about 42,000 state employees. When it was all over, people asked, how I defined my success over those 8 years as governor and 22 years of public service. And I used to say, or I still say, the fact that I started and finished office married to the same wife. I was never indicted. And when I left office, I got a real job. And I think this day and age, that's a pretty remarkable success. Term limits after 2 terms was a very honorable way, an exit strategy to leave office. And for those interested in what kind of transition you get on the last day in office, my wife and I got a ride home from the inaugural ceremonies for my successor, and the detail thanked us for 8 years and said goodbye and drove off, and that was the end of the transition. One of my colleagues told me, they said, the way you always know when you're no longer governor is when you get in the back seat of the car and you don't go anywhere. I think it's also very important when you're in a leadership position that you understand that we don't own these positions. We're afforded the opportunity, the honor of serving in leadership positions for a brief period of time, and then it's transitioned on to someone else. And I can't tell you how amazed I was at the significant number of moments during the time I was in office when, whether it was arrogance, stupidity, whether it was ego or entitlement, a number of my colleagues allowed that to get in the way of sound judgment and responsibility. And not knowing where anyone might be from in this audience, my friend Jim Guy Tucker from Arkansas went to prison. Don Siegelman from Alabama went to prison. John Rowland from Connecticut went to prison. Fife Symington from Arizona went to prison. George Ryan from Illinois went to prison. I know you're from Illinois, so that's what. And then there's Jesse Ventura. We have assigned seating at the National Governors Association, and as luck would have it, Kansas is next to Minnesota. So for 4 years, I enjoyed the company of Jesse Ventura throughout our meetings, and that could be a subject I could talk about for a long period of time. But the list goes on, and I just simply have to tell you that there's something intoxicating about the highest levels of success and power, especially in political offices, and what gets into people's minds I do not know, but I count myself as blessed that it never happened to me. I think it's important to keep perspective. I've never asked anybody to do something that I wouldn't have done myself. My dad made sure I started out sweeping up trash around the freight docks and loading it into an old truck and driving it out to the dump and delivering it. When I was first working in the state capitol building in 1980, I was tasked with delivering law books to members of the Kansas legislature, doing all sorts of menial tasks, and I've always remembered working your way up from the bottom, and again, not asking somebody to do something that you wouldn't do. I believe very much in open communication and have always encouraged my team to practice the art of disagreeing without being disagreeable. I think you have to have a full and robust discussion in any organization, but at the end of the day, you have to make it clear that decisions get made, and if you're the leader, you make those decisions. Certainly growing up in a political environment, I always appreciated the notion that politics is the art of what's possible. And that's especially true now in my role at the American Trucking Associations, because with the gridlock and the problems we have in Washington, D.C., there's a lot of things that we'd like to see done that in some instances are just not possible. And Don alluded, of course, to our support for fuel tax increases for infrastructure investment. We'd like to see that done, but just not right. It's just not going to happen right now. I always loved Yogi-isms, and along that same line, Yogi once said, if people don't want to go out to the ballpark, you can't stop them. Sometimes things just aren't going to go your way, and there is nothing you can do about it, and somehow getting your arms around that as a leader is, quite frankly, very, very important. There's also the moment of painful choices in leadership, and I've probably got more stories I could tell in that regard, but let me just share the one that stands out in my mind. During my tenure in office, a big topic of discussion in my state was whether or not people should carry concealed weapons. And of course, the weapon debate continues to this very day, but while I was in office, my legislature passed a piece of legislation that basically authorized concealed weapons could be carried throughout our state. I had a problem with that concept then. I still have a problem with that concept today. But here's where it got really dicey for me. The leading legislative proponent of carrying concealed weapons, a fine gentleman by the name of Gary Hazlett, he was also chairman of the House Transportation Committee. And he was the key individual I was working with to put together that 10-year, $13 billion comprehensive transportation plan. So I got put into that very awkward, uncomfortable situation of having to work on the one hand cooperatively with Gary on what I wanted, a big transportation plan, but knowing in my heart that when the time came, I was not going to be supportive of his number one legislative agenda, which was concealed carry of weapons. I was fortunate it worked out for me. I vetoed concealed carry. Gary Hazlett, while not agreeing, was a gentleman and understood that that was my prerogative and still understood the importance of infrastructure investment in our state and worked hand in hand to see that program implemented. But I will tell you that I spent many a night anguishing over what I was going to do about that. And by the way, the veto occurred before I was reelected to my second term. I worked hard at picking the best team possible, and this is might be a little out of left field, but I don't know why it was. I found a passion, at least in government, more inherent, you might say, in women than I did in men. My lieutenant governor was a woman. My general counsel was a woman. My chief of staff was a woman. My secretary of agriculture was a woman. And they all served me very well. I paid no attention at all to political labels. In fact, we had a sort of a grand announcement on a stage not unlike this one where I brought my entire team in to announce to the state through the State House Press Corps media who was going to serve in the various positions: Secretary of Corrections, Agriculture, Social Services, Health and Human Services, Natural Resources, et cetera. And at one point during the presentation, one of the State House Press Corps members raised their hand and said, "Are any of your appointees Democrats?" And I have to be honest with you, as I was with the person asking the question, I actually didn't know the answer. So I turned to my group and I said, "Are any of you Democrats?" To which one, my Secretary of Human Resources, Wayne Franklin, said, "I am." And that was sort of the end of the questioning about whether or not we were playing, fair, if you will, or whether we were biasing our selections based on political preference. It matters not. You got to find the people who can make you look good, because at the end of the day, much of the credit falls to the leader. And finally, the one thing I want to say about that is there's a moment when direct and clarity in instruction really matters. And sometimes it's not, again, a very comfortable situation. But I was dealing with a massive proposal to cut taxes in our state well beyond what I thought was prudent. I had sort of said, ineffectively apparently, a number of times, this is what we should do, this is how far we should go, this is what I'm willing to accept. But I apparently failed to actually put my foot down and really draw a line in the sand. And I got called to a caucus of the Senate Republicans one day who were about ready to mutiny and run off and do something that I thought would be unfoolish. And as reported in the news, my quote that got a lot of press was, I said to the Senate Republicans, I said, "Which part of hell no don't you understand?" Now, I was accused of swearing in public, which was about the worst thing that came out of all that, but sometimes it is important that you really make clear, and in that case, I probably erred on not doing a better job earlier on. I arrived at ATA in January of 2003, took over a wonderful organization, but the first thing that came to mind at ATA that had to be dealt with was finding the courage to tell people what they needed to hear and not what they wanted to hear, which I think had gone on for far too long in our organization. Another great quote that I think is worth mentioning at this time: today, the challenge of political courage looms larger than ever before, for our everyday life is becoming so saturated with the tremendous power of mass communications that any unpopular or unorthodox course or cause arouses a storm of protest. Well, that sounds like somebody wrote that in the last week or so. That was John F. Kennedy in Profiles in Courage in 1955. It does take courage to stand up and say what needs to be said, and as Don alluded to in the introduction, when I got to ATA, we were experts at what we were against. We were experts at no, but we weren't very good at what we were for. And so we have worked very hard, and I am very proud of the fact that we've changed that culture. And we're saying, yes, we would support a fuel tax increase to build out and maintain infrastructure. Yes, we think we ought to slow down as a nation and be safer on the nation's highways. In fact, if there are Texans in the room, there's a new toll road in Texas which has caught my attention, and some of you perhaps have seen it. It's a privatized toll road that the state has allowed an independent contractor to manage. And I believe, am I not right, the speed limit's 85 miles an hour? Or is it 90? 85. It's 85 miles an hour. And the interesting thing about the way that was determined, the private contractor that was bidding on the road agreed to pay the state more money the higher the speed limit they were allowed to set on the road. So if it would have been 80, they wouldn't have had to pay as much as 85. If it had been 75, they would have paid the state less than 80. And the idea being that the faster the speed limit, the more likely it is that people are going to want to come over and drive on that road. We raised some concerns about safety issues at 85 miles an hour, which, let's face it, we all know what's the rule. You get to go, what, 7 or 8 over the posted speed limit? So everybody's driving 92 or 93 miles an hour on this road. We actually got a response from the company running the road that basically said they had determined that at higher speeds, you're paying much closer attention to your driving than at slower speeds. And so it was actually going to be safer to be going about 90 because everybody was up on the wheel, really focused on what they were doing. Now, I don't know who did the research, but we obviously disagree with it, and we think everyone ought to slow down. We believe in automated speed enforcement, red light cameras, all the things that Don mentioned. Those are all important issues to us and issues that we are advancing every day. We're doing that with DOT and the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. One other lesson in leadership, of course, is don't burn any bridges. And we certainly have moments with those agencies where we have serious disagreements, but we have to work very carefully to make sure we maintain the relationships that allow us to continue to do good work on behalf of our industry. I'm going to close with one of the questions Dawn asked to touch on, and that was in your character and leadership skill development, in how you view your life as it was shaped and evolved throughout the year. Who is it you generally give credit to? And I'd say there are probably 5 people that I clearly credit with me being who I am today. And you won't be surprised that my mom and my dad were first on my list. They were old-fashioned, hard-working Kansans, honest, generous with their time, generous with their money. They rewarded people that were loyal to them with their loyalty. And certainly understood the golden rule of doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. The other 3, 2 that you don't know, 1 that you do, my high school football coach, a guy named Kay Pierce, who unfortunately was also my algebra instructor. That's a lousy combination when you have a coach who's also the algebra instructor. But Coach Pierce left Salina High and went on to Topeka, where he ran the Kansas State High School Activities Association. And what's important to know in that regard is as the executive director of that organization, he was the person who enforced the rules on all activities in Kansas high schools. And I have to tell you, I learned from Coach Pierce to follow the rules. Even if you don't agree with them, you follow the rules, you find another venue or opportunity to discuss what your disagreements are, but you always follow the rules. My other mentor was my college football coach, a gentleman by the name of Gene Bissell. I had a great season under Coach Bissell, 9-1. I had a lousy season under Coach Bissell, 1-9. In hindsight, they both looked the same to me. They were great experiences with a great team of people, learning from a great football coach. On one particular day, when I was not having my finest moment, Coach Bissell was in my ear, blowing his whistle, hollering his lungs out at something I was inadequately doing on the practice field, and stopped practice, kind of gathered everybody around, made me the example, but said to everybody, you know, the reason I am all over Graves is because I still care about him. And the day I stop yelling at any of you will be the day you know that I don't care about you. And so there is a time and a place in our leadership roles where we do have to get the attention of those who work for us and let them know we care and help them improve and be better in what they do. And the last person that you all know was Bob Dole. And I was absolutely blessed to consider Senator Dole as a mentor in my political life. I love the advice he gave about how to handle cranky constituents who send you, these really awful letters complaining about your public service. Dole said, listen, I just take the original letter and down at the bottom I write, some damn fool sent me this letter and signed your name. And I send it back to him. I thought that was pretty good advice. I was having trouble with my legislature one year. I couldn't bring closure and get the thing done so we could go home and get on with our lives. And Dole sent me a note, and he said, send the speaker a note, make him a counteroffer that'll close the session down, get us out of town. And he said, your postscript should read, how can I miss you if you won't leave? Which I actually thought was great. And the third bit of advice was, Dole said, if you don't have any trouble with the group you're talking to, don't talk long enough to create any. Right now, I don't think I have any trouble with this group, and so that's all I have to say. Thank you all very much.
Governor, thank you very much for your remarks. They're just some fascinating insight and learning for all of us here. I now have the pleasure to introduce someone near and dear to me, Joe Duty, Staples President of North American Delivery. Joe and I joined Staples 15 years ago within 1 month of each other, and it's been a fabulous journey ever since. Joe is responsible for Staples Advantage, which serves medium-sized to Fortune 1000 businesses, Staples.com, which services small businesses through a website and catalog, and Quill.com, a 50-year-old direct marketer of office products to small and medium-sized businesses. Joe is also responsible for Staples business in Australia and New Zealand. Before joining Staples in 1998, he was president of Danker Office Imaging Business in North America. And from 1974 to 1997, he worked at Eastman Kodak in various roles of growing responsibility, the last being general manager and vice president of their North America office imaging. Under Joe's leadership, Staples delivery businesses have grown from the number 4 player in the office products industry to the clear leader. In the most recent quarter reported to Wall Street, Staples' top line was 3 times greater than its nearest competitor, and operating income was 11 times higher. SCLA members, please welcome Joe to the stage.
Thank you, Don. Thank you. Thank you, Don. How y'all doing? Good?
Good.
Good. Well, it's my pleasure to be with you here this afternoon. First, let me straighten out a few things, factually at least. One is Don earlier said that that we were expert leaders. Well, I can't speak for the governor, but I know that I'm not an expert or extraordinary or any of those things. I hope to be, a good leader, trying to strive to be great at all times. And I'll give you at least my views on it, and would welcome questions at the end as well. So let me get started. First, here was one that caught me when I was always researching how to be a better leader, and I had the pleasure of sitting through a leadership session with General Colin Powell. And one of the quotes that I really was struck with is that leadership is the art of accomplishing more than the science of management says is possible. It's just a fascinating thought to think that how we as leaders can really do more than I think and many of us could ever expect to do through the power of all the people that we interact and touch every day. So let me tell you a little bit about my story and sort of what my background is. Born and raised in upstate New York. We have any upstate New Yorkers here? Any Buffalo Bills fans here? We got a few suffering Bills fans. 14 years and counting. It's the NFL's record for not making the playoffs, for those of you who don't know. I wish I didn't know that, but unfortunately that is very true. Married in 73, which means I better get ready for the big 40th this year, so I'm glad I put that date down on the sheet of paper. And yes, I was married at the age of 12. As you can see, I was married in 73, but got my MBA through University of Rochester in 75, which was a fascinating situation that my wife and I got married over Labor Day weekend, and the following Wednesday I started grad school. So that was not the best of timing, but just the way it worked out. As she worked and I went to school. We were blessed to do a one and done with children, triplets. We had triplets in 1980. We made sure we didn't get near each other for many years after that. We were immediately outmanned or outpersoned, and we're playing zone defense from day one. All three of them are best friends, and all got married within 15 months of one another. And believe me, I tried to get one big bang wedding out of it, but it just wouldn't go over. So we did it 3 times, all within 15 months in 2008, 2009. As Don said, 23 years with Kodak, now 15 years with Staples. In my 23 years with Kodak, it was 10 jobs in 8 different locations, including an international assignment. And in my 15 years with Staples, it's essentially been one job in one location. Came in to head up our delivery business, which at the time was a little less than $2 billion. And I still have the pleasure of heading up our delivery business, which is now about $10 billion. So it's been a great ride. It's been a great 15 years, and hopefully it will last much longer. And then we've been blessed with 6 grandchildren, all under the age of 4. So if you come anywhere near our house on the holidays, watch where you walk, because you might step on 1 or 2 of them, because they are all down there somewhere on the ground. So that's my path. Small town, Batavia, New York, between Buffalo and Rochester, and I think what the governor said is very true. Remember your roots, because I've tried to stay true to that throughout my career. Let me talk about what I think you really come to listen to a little bit as leadership characteristics. What are the key characteristics of a leader? This was actually a study that was done back about 5-6 years ago, listing all sorts of leadership characteristics, and these are how they ranked in terms of the top 5 leadership characteristics. Team building skills, integrity, character, experience, and creativity. Interestingly enough, about 10 years prior to this, they did the same survey, and character was not anywhere near the top 5. Now, certainly the time that they did it had an impact on that. If you think back of Enron and other things going on back in the time period that this survey was done, character really stepped up in terms of its importance as far as a leadership characteristic. If you got the best, you got to have what's the least desirable. Micromanager. You know, you can see the list there. How many of you have worked for a leader that has one or more of these characteristics? Anybody? We've got a few hands up. Anybody from Staples have their hand up? No. I can say I've honestly been blessed, and I have worked for no leader who strongly shows these characteristics. I think there's times where probably all of us exhibit some of these to some degree or another. But what I'd really like to focus on are what I believe are the key table stakes, if you will, for to become, a leader and considered a leader. I think one, it starts with you've got to have honesty, and you can look at that as honesty, trustworthiness, ethical. All of those factors, I think, is really makes up what is truly got to be honest. As I say, to my team, anything that I do, any decision I make, any action that I take, if it were to be put on the front page of my mother's paper, would she read it and say, "Joe, I'm proud of you"? Just that simple. That's my litmus test, if you will. Next one, competence. I think you need to have competence in terms of having a proven track record, experience. A lot of different words here, but you've got to be competent in the area. In the area that you're going to be leading. I think that's absolutely one that is required to be a leader. Forward-looking, somebody who really is a visionary and can look at where the organization needs to be or needs to be going, or where you want to take them, and I think needs to stress it in a way that people can see and hear and understand that in a very simple way. I think back just a few years ago, and I'll give you a few examples of how I've tried to relate to some of these, but a few years ago, we've been challenged for growth, top-line growth, and many of us probably in this room have felt that over the last several years, certainly since 08, 09. And we were looking for other categories to really expand in besides our core office supplies products. And we did a bunch of work to look at what are the top adjacencies, if you will, or what we called beyond office supply categories, came up with 5 of them and said these are the 5 growth areas for us going into the future, these 5 non-core areas. But at the time, I knew that there was one of them that really needed to be stressed more than the others. So I went very public within the organization to say that we have 3, not 5, growth criteria for the next several years. And it's facilities and break room, facilities and break room, facilities and break room. And what's number 4 and 5 priority beyond that, I don't care, but it's one of those 5 really is so important to us that it needs to be the number 1, 2, and 3 priority. And you look back on that now, and over these last several years, we've been growing that particular category at over 20% growth on a base of about $1 billion, which is not an easy task. So I think really getting clarity in terms of where you're going and how you stress that to the organization, I think is extremely important. And then finally, I think one needs to be inspiring. It needs to be encouraging, needs to be confident, needs to really be inspiring for the organization to really look up to and say, okay, that person is somebody that I want to follow. And I think when you get all 4 of those characteristics, those table stake characteristics, now I think you have credibility, if you will, to be a leader and to be considered a leader. And without them, I don't think you have that credibility to be considered a leader within the organization. But that's not all that's needed. I think truly effective leaders, I think must have a very high degree of EQ. How many of you have seen, read, discussed emotional intelligence? Well, I think it's something that is undervalued and is, to me, one of the most critical parts of being a truly good or great leader. The components are listed there. I can recall when I joined the organization in 1998, I read an article that I still to this day carry around with me on emotional intelligence. It I think sort of set the stage for me to really understand what I needed to do to really become proficient in terms of all the different attributes of emotional intelligence. Self-awareness, really know yourself, be honest with yourself. Make sure that the actions that you take, you realize, and how you do things, how you say things, the impact that they have on others. Be self-aware of everything you're doing. Self-regulation, I think, is absolutely critical. How many of you wish you could take back something you said? You know, think before you speak. Become extremely self-regulated. Motivation. When you look at motivation, I think to be really motivated to do more than just what money and prestige and ego. It's really somebody who is committed to the betterment of the organization as a whole, not just to the job they're doing. And I think that is absolutely critical. Empathy. Really putting yourself in other people's place. One of the examples of this is one of the tough decisions I made early on when I took over the organization was to close down a call center in a particular part of the country where we just had a difficult time hiring labor and keeping our labor full and productive in that particular location. We made that decision, but realized that we were going to go to another location, and it wasn't going to be until about 9 to 10 months later before that other location could be ready for us. We put ourselves into the place of those people there and basically made the decision that says, when we know, you'll know. And we told those people over 9 months in advance that we were going to close down that facility. And because we had made that decision, and we didn't want them to find out about it any other way. And we put ourselves in the place of that associate and said, we're going to treat those people fairly with a retention bonus, with a obviously with a severance package when they do in fact leave, but it's also knowing and helping them prepare for the next step. And interestingly enough, we've done this ever since throughout our operation. When we've had duplicate facilities through acquisitions or whatever, we've closed down, and the people appreciate that more than ever. And also, I will tell you that the productivity, no matter how you measure it in those different locations, typically goes up during that time period before you close it down. It's typically people rally behind, oh my gosh, they're treating me fair, I'm going to make sure I treat them fair as well. So empathy, I think, really played out in that case. And then finally, I think a key element is social skill. How well can you relate, how well can you build rapport across all sorts of different constituents that you interact with within your organizations? To me, that's critical because as leaders, we all do things through people. And how well can we relate to those people, I think, is absolutely critical. And having the social skill to be able to do that, I think, is absolutely essential. I know in my situation, probably similar to many of yours, we're dealing with people that are everywhere from maybe high school educated to people that are working in our organizations that are MBAs from a top Ivy League school. And obviously how you relate to one is quite different in terms of how you're relating to the others. And I think that's extremely important to be able to have the ability to be able to carry on a rapport with all elements of your organization, to be able to then really become somebody who they feel comfortable with and that can really rally behind and take direction from as we lead them to bigger and better things. So to me, effective leaders really have to have an extremely high EQ. And I sort of pride myself on one thing. I'm sort of like the governor maybe in some cases. I wasn't the greatest of students as I went through high school and got a little bit better in college, but I'll put my EQ against my IQ any day. And the EQ wins out, and I'm hopeful that in my job today as a leader within Staples, the EQ does play a big role in that. But it's not enough, because to me, you've got to go the next step, and many of you, I'm sure, have read and studied Jim Collins' work in Good to Great. And as I say, strive for level 5, a level 5 leader. And to me, this is really what you're trying to achieve, and what I strive for is really having a bigger goal of building a great company. As I tell our leaders within our organization, and we made an acquisition back about almost 5 years ago now that was a pretty big acquisition for us. It was Hostile, which is the first and only hostile acquisition Staples has ever made. And it was in the delivery space, and it added almost $4 billion of revenue in my business. And I met for the first time with the leader of that after we had already closed the deal. And I sort of set the expectations that we're here to build a great company together. And my expectation was very simple. You know, first, first when you're thinking of what to do what's right for Staples. Second, do what's right for North American Delivery, the division within Staples. Third, do what's right for your business within the company. And fourth, do what's right for you. And as long as you start at the top of the list and work down, you'll be great. And we want you here. If you're going to start at the bottom of the list in terms of how you're going to make a decision and base it upon that, what's best for you, then why don't we part ways now, and we'll go a different direction. So I think that's, to me, is one where get everybody aligned properly towards driving what's best for the company and the organization as a whole. I think a level 5 leader needs to be there, but I think that's what you need to then rally the whole organization around. I think the next two on here, as far as level 5 leaders, I think are very similar and tie in together. You don't want to be the show horse, you want to be the plow horse. Just do the job, get it done, and everybody will find out about it over time. I remember reading an article about the leader of HP, Carly Fiorina. Yes. In the last year she was at HP, she made over 100 presentations to outside audiences that had nothing to do with HP's business. And you looked at the performance of their company. Mark Hurd came in, and I think Mark Hurd, prior to some problems he got involved with, but prior to that, he was really viewed as more of the plow horse. Just put your head down, get the job done, and focus on the organization, focus on the business. So I think it's really one that does separate, I think, a level 5 leader from others. I think as level 5 leaders, I think it's long-term, sustained performance over time. Don't give me a good quarter, give me a good several years, many years, and just be fanatically driven by continually driving consistent, sustained performance. Clearly, I think it's holding yourself accountable, taking the fall when things don't go right, but certainly giving credit to everyone on the team when things do, and those specifically that are driving those results. And I think finally, as a part of the level 5 leadership, it's really what are we all doing to prepare ourselves for even greater greatness in the future, and preparing people to be able to take on that responsibility as well. My goal, I know when I leave the company at some point in time, is that it becomes totally seamless. Whoever takes over for me just continues to take it to the next level and even higher without missing a beat. And it's an internal person that we've developed over time to become that next great leader. That to me is really doing the job and doing the organization the job properly, is when you've done the preparation work to prepare multiple leaders to potentially lead on after you. Finally, I'd just like to, two final things, I guess, besides a few quotes. One of the things that we found ourselves at Staples with is we were having some lapses in some of our leadership ranks within the organization back 5 to 10 years ago, and didn't have consistency in terms of how our leaders were really leading their organizations. So we came up with, if you can show this next slide here, a leadership pledge. This was a pledge that we came up with, and my management team, when we introduced this, signed it and said, we're not only signing it, we're committing to it, we're going to live by it, and we expect each and every one of you to hold us accountable to it. And if you see that we ever take an action or do something that's not consistent with this, it's your job to call us on it. And I will tell you, in the 10-ish years since we've had it, I've actually had one person come in and call me on it. And, had great strength to come in. It was during some of the sticky discussions that we were getting in with regarding the integration of these two businesses, the business that we had acquired back in 2007, and this was actually, in 2008. And that person called me on it, and I said, you're right. I did not, consistently operate in one of these areas to the degree that I should have. And thank that person, and we'll never forget that the rest of my life. Now, that person is no longer with us anymore, but that's a whole other story. I'm kidding. That person was a director at the time, and today is a VP within the company. But if you look at this next slide, it just sort of summarizes what we were looking for in our leaders. That they create an environment of trust. They treat everybody with respect and dignity, and I did not treat everybody in this meeting with respect and dignity, and this person called me on it. That they encourage open and honest communication, that all your ideas and suggestions count, that we operate at all times with the highest levels of ethics and integrity. We look to consistently deliver results, and that we all share, it's an equal sharing in the responsibility to make it a great place to work. It's not all my job, it's all of our jobs. And so this was, I think, a defining moment for us in terms of getting people, all of our leaders. And so if we go out to our different locations throughout the field, I expect that the leaders within that building have put this together. It's up on the wall. They've communicated to their organization. It really changes how you operate day in and day out to live that leadership pledge. I'm thrilled every time I go out to the field visit one of our operations. They ask me to add my signature to it as well. I'll end by a few of my favorite advice quotes regarding leadership, and some just miscellaneous. You can never learn anything when you're talking. I think a good leader has to be a great listener. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know. And if you really are honest with yourself, you'll probably use it more often than you care to admit to. I think this is critical about show horse, plow horse, but don't talk about what you're going to do, just do it, and then let other people talk about it. I firmly believe that the respect of one person is worth more than the acquaintance of 100. I try to build the respect of any and everybody within my organization one day at a time. I do take my work very seriously, but those of you that, if you were to get to know me, you'd know that I don't take myself very seriously. And I just can't imagine that I could operate any other way, and I'm not saying that that's always a great leader, but I think we can't, as the governor said, get hung up with what the title is, what the responsibility or whatever. I'm still from Batavia, New York, and my mother's still reading the paper every day, and I'm making sure I'm just trying to do everything she'd be proud of. Again, I think a leader's job is to really produce great leaders within the organization and develop those leaders. Last two quotes. Our job's to serve. What can I do to make any one of my members of my team successful while ensuring that we're working together as a team to do what's right for the organization first and foremost? There's not many times that I don't go by asking, what can I do to help? What can I do to help make you and your team successful? Making sure they're all working as a part of the overall team, but my job is to really make sure that I'm helping them to be successful. And then the final one is to me, is the high level that you try to achieve is, if your actions can help to, as a leader, if you can help to inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then boy, you are a leader. And I tell you, as I look back on my 15 years, I've seen some fantastic growing and development among people on my team that you really got to feel great as a leader to try to help others to really develop and become great leaders in and by themselves. So that's my advice. Those are my quotes, and I thank you for the time and attention. I know that each of you in your own way are leaders, and hopefully you've picked something up here that can help you to become even a greater leader within your own organization. I thank you for your time.
Joe, again, thank you very much. Again, some more terrific insight and nuggets of learning for all of us. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the next portion of the session. Many of you here know Tim Stratman, but for those who are new, Tim is founder and president of Stratman Partners Executive Coaching, an executive coaching firm that focuses on helping C-level executives become more effective leaders. He's been retained by senior executives to provide both one-on-one confidential business coaching and executive team development and facilitation. Tim has worked with executives across a diverse set of industries in both public and private companies, and in addition to a C-level practice, he has a subspecialty focused on coaching senior supply chain executives. For over 20 years, Tim held increasingly responsible positions with R.R. Donnelley, culminating in president of RRD Direct. Tim has spoken to numerous organizations, including the U.S. Department of State, the American Association of Healthcare Consultants, the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, the National Association of Executive Recruiters, and the National Safety Council. He's also been published in various articles, including Supply Chain Management Review, Inside Supply Management, and Supply Chain Quarterly. Please welcome Tim back to SCLA.
Can you hear me? Okay. I'm going to actually come out here and fulfill my Phil Donahue fantasy. Is anybody old enough to even know who Phil Donahue was, right? Who remembers Phil Donahue? Okay. I'm going to do my best, all right? You remember. Okay. All right, Bill. Well, first of all, let's give it up. It was a wonderful set of some great stuff in there, and I'd like to start off the questioning, if you will, and I'm going to ask all of you to get involved and participate in this. One of the things that I often see when I'm working with executives, actually maybe I'll start with a question. How many people here consistently get great performance and leadership feedback from the people they work with? Whoa, okay. So oftentimes we don't, now how many people just don't want to answer the question? All right. Well, one of the things that I have found with the best leaders I work with is they understand the power of feedback. They understand the power of performance feedback and coaching, right? So I'd like to turn it to both Bill and Joe and say, what are some of the things that you do when you're giving feedback to people that you work with, that you think extends your leadership effectiveness, helps them? What are some things that the group may be able to learn from when they're doing this for their own people? Either one.
Well, I'll start out. I guess one is, I think most everybody that I've had those feedback discussions with welcomes and wants that feedback. So I think we shouldn't feel like it's, boy, what are they going to think and how's it going to go? They're looking for good, honest, effective feedback. And to me, it's really zero in on what can happen, what can it do to help you in terms of your future development and career development, and putting it in a way that you're just trying to do something that can help them to achieve their goals, both short and long term. And I found it to be extremely well accepted. I've had discussions, and giving them that advice is, to me, is one that they welcome, and as long as it puts them in a position where they realize that, yes, if I do that, it can help me to achieve both my short and long-term goals that much more effectively.
Well, it sounds like it's not just a report card. It's really about the person. It's an investment in them.
Oh, absolutely.
And letting them know and feel that you care about them. Bill, do you have any thoughts on that?
Tim, I just mentioned briefly, we do an annual employee, survey where we let them tell us what they think about how we're doing. And I'm not necessarily pleased to tell you that one of the areas that I need to do a better job on is providing that kind of feedback to especially my senior staff. keep in mind, we're an association, and so what we're trying to do is serve members of the American Trucking Association, and the way we serve them best is by achieving advocacy victories over on Capitol Hill. It gets a little nebulous on how you measure, and actually the feedback is a little more difficult, I think, but we try to make sure we understand who we're serving, who our customer is, and it's our member. And quite frankly, at the end of the day, to the extent we have successes on Capitol Hill, our members are willing to allow us to recognize and reward the performance of the individuals that made those successes happen.
So it's really important from a feedback perspective to not forget the good things people do, right? That often has as much leverage or more than pointing out the things that maybe they don't do so well. How about the group? You have to have lots of questions, right?
Yeah, Roddy Martin from Accenture, ex-AMR Research. So if one listens to all of the discussions around supply chain being growth strategy for the business, it does mean a very fundamental mental model change from a leadership point of view. So my question to you is, as leaders, you probably have to deal with a lot of potential conflict, differences across functions, because now we want to operate as an end-to-end business, starting with a customer, not as just a set of functional silos. How do you deal with that conflict, those differences from a leadership level?
Well, I think I'll speak in my case, I think it's getting everybody to really be striving for something that's higher level than just the organization within which they're operating. That's not always easy, but I've got people on my team that have a P&L for a business, as well as, like in Don's case, who has a set of operating metrics that they have to achieve. But in the end, we're all driving for the overall performance of the company as a whole, and that's got to be priority number one. And so I value heavily, and I think the team obviously knows this, is to really make sure we're doing what's right for the company first, even though it may have a conflict with what's best for your part of the business. Give you an example of that. We're in the process of trying to, most important thing to the company as a whole right now is driving top-line revenue. We just recently went to a free delivery on any and all orders on Staples.com, as long as you're a Staples Rewards member, which means anybody in this room could just sign up to become a Staples Reward members. What that does is dramatically can have an impact of lowering our average order size, which ends up hurting Don's and Don's team's performance significantly in terms of their efficiencies of operations. But it's the best thing for the company. We're not going to fight internally to say, why are we doing that? I need to get help or whatever. We just got to go ahead and do that, and then find how we best manage that situation and do what's right for the company first, and then deal with the outcomes as a result of that. But not get into the, no, I'm not going to approve that, or I'm not going to support that because that's going to hurt my metrics. If Don takes that view, it's, to me, it's one where you're not really going what's right for the company first. And so it's really setting the higher overall, do what's right for the organization, and trying to bring it above that level. Are you still going to have conflict? Sure. They can impact your business and part of your operation, yes. But we got to do what's right first and foremost for the company. And then we obviously have to have the management incentives behind that as well. So most of our incentives are around company performance versus, as far as bonus and things like that, versus individual performance.
Bill, do you have a point you want to make on that?
Well, it's probably not necessarily spot on relevant, but I'll give you one anecdotal issue that I deal with all the time. I have both the blessing and the curse of owning my own trade publication. Trust me, you really don't want to own your own trade publication, because whenever your trade publication that you own writes a story about one of your members that your member doesn't like, they call you and ask you why it is a publication that they are part owners of is writing bad stuff about them. Communication is the key, in that you've got to explain for the greater good of what we do, which is, again, we're trying to generate advocacy success on Capitol Hill. It costs a lot of money. My trade publication generates a lot of money to support advocacy. And so I find myself in a lot of one-on-one retail conversations trying to make sure people understand sort of the intricacies of advocacy in my industry. Just got to keep talking to folks.
Other questions? Really? You're kidding me? Huh? Is there one up there? Okay. I got a bunch of them. All right. Oh, yeah.
What's been your biggest leadership challenge?
Now or over time? Either or. I think the biggest challenge and the biggest failure I'd point to over time is when I worked for Eastman Kodak Company. And we were not as focused as we needed to be on doing one or two things right, and we're trying to stretch our technology across too many things. And as a result of that, we failed on those, which in the end, I wouldn't say led to the failure of the company, because this precedes, the company's current bankruptcy by quite a bit, 20 years ago. But back 20 years ago, the biggest failure was that I did not speak up strongly enough against us diluting our research efforts among too many projects, such that we not only didn't make it for some new products that we were bringing out, but we also didn't make it in a timely way on what's our continuation of our existing product line. And as a result of that, it ended up forcing us to really miss badly in terms of sales and earnings for several years, and ended up then the company basically divesting of that business. So that was very, I think a failure, on my part, to not really be forceful enough in those discussions within the management team. So that'd be my biggest failure. Challenge, I think our biggest challenge is the one we face today, is how do we, in an industry where we are declining, our core business is declining and will continue to decline forever, how do we still grow our business? How do we find opportunities to grow our business in a declining marketplace? That is my number 1, 2, and 3 challenge, and will probably be for the next many years.
So, Joe, on that just for a second. So when you remember those discussions at Eastman that, involved decisions that you ultimately disagreed with, or that you ultimately wish you had stood up and said something, what do you think, what created the inertia for you? What kept you from speaking up the way you would like in retrospect to have spoken up?
Well, I think it was probably the position that I was in, the place I was in my career at that time, was probably the number one reason. I spoke up, but not forcefully enough. I didn't really drive it home strong enough. Brought it up, but didn't really drive it home until it was too late, until we realized it was too late. But I think the issue was there probably, moving well, nicely in my career, maybe be a little careful as to how far you push this.
How many people can relate to being in a situation where you wanted to maybe push it, but you decided you wouldn't because of those kind of considerations? Are the rest of you not telling the truth, or are you not involved? Are you kidding me, right? We've all been there, right? We've all been there. So part of it is overcoming that, whatever that reticence or that fear or whatever it is, and that you learn through experience, right? If you could play it again, you would have played it differently, but
Certainly would.
that goes for so many things in life.
Yeah.
Bill, do you have a perspective on that?
Just briefly, I can just tell you, I alluded to it in my comments. My challenge is I'm running an organization that's supposed to go to Capitol Hill and win victories, and it is such an odd, difficult political environment for anything. And quite frankly, as much as I don't like to admit it, if I go to Capitol Hill and say I want to talk about trucking or transportation-related issues, we're not at the top of the pecking order over on Capitol Hill. We're way down the list, which is why we're struggling so mightily. Internal to my organization, I have to tell you, I'm sometimes not the quickest responder on personnel-type issues, and I get myself sometimes in a crack because I keep giving some people the benefit of the doubt that probably I shouldn't, but it's just my nature. Blessing and a curse.
Joe and Bill, by the way, that was your presentations were excellent because you took an abstract concept, at least for me, make it very tangible. I actually, for whatever it's worth, I wanted to make a comment before I made the question, and that is, it's interesting, my own personal career, I grew up in a company where I literally started at 21 as a young kid, a co-op student, and then worked my way up, and now I'm CEO, which sounds very, quite a meteoric rise. But what happens in a scenario like that when it comes to working your way up the ladder is you really question your leadership capabilities because you remember the scared kid in all the years that you were an underling to everybody else, and although you appreciate the coaching and the leadership that you aspired to, and leader you aspired to become, you always question if you don't think you have the broad leadership skills or haven't developed them yet, whether you truly are a leader. You know, what I've learned in the last few years is that, and to the points made, you can be a leader in a fairly narrow environment. I mean, if you're willing to subjugate yourself, put the organization above your own personal interests, as you were referring to, Joe, and care about doing a good job, you can find yourself being a leader in one environment and not necessarily being a leader across the board. So for any of you, as has been the case with me, who questioned, am I really a leader? You can be a leader where you want to be. You don't have to be a leader every place. Hopefully you learn from those experiences and broaden your leadership, but it isn't automatic. My question is, referring to personnel development and performance, one of the challenges I see in an organization, and we're a lot smaller certainly than Staples, is the ability to personally coach and develop people multiple layers down who are instrumental but aren't your direct reports. Because to the point made, you don't want to micromanage. On the other hand, if you are coaching the person who is your direct report and they're not doing a great job of developing their team, you know, you don't necessarily have the luxury of time to wait until you make a decision on whether they belong in that role or not. So I'd be curious to know kind of how you handle that so you don't lose momentum while you're assessing the leader you put in place of these people.
Yeah. Well, just a few comments. One is we've got a pretty structured process where we try to look for leaders that are rising up within the organization. We actually have categories like rising stars, that we identify people at certain grade levels that we feel have the opportunity to move multiple levels within the organization. So through a very rigorous succession planning process, we identify who those people are. Because the organization is so big, I don't have a chance or the ability to be able to really interact with them on a regular basis. Plus, we're dispersed throughout, you know, North America and in my case, Australia, New Zealand as well. But I do, when I do travel out there, I do make a real effort to try to sit down and actually spend time with one-on-one with our rising stars. So as I travel to the field, I'll identify where that location is in advance and say, okay, here's the 2 or 3 people that I want to meet with based on the fact that they've been identified through our succession planning as a rising star and touch base with them. And so at least get to know them a little bit and have them certainly get to know me as well. The other thing that I've tried to do over the years, one thing that's had a big impact, I feel, at least I get a lot of feedback that it does, is again, because of the size of the organization, we have upwards of like 70 vice presidents that are within my organization. I have a hard time, you know, again, interacting with even them on a regular basis, especially when they're all scattered geographically. But I reach out to every one of them on their anniversary date and have a one-on-one discussion with them. Just to say, hi, how you doing? You know, congratulations, your 25th year, whatever. Not many get that, but 7, 8, 9, I mean, we're only 26 years old as a company. But to reach out to them and really have that discussion, have that dialogue, and in many cases, you know, when I call the next year, they'll say, Joe, I was waiting for your call today. And it's just a great discussion to just understand and a little bit more about who they are, but more what are their challenges today. It's also a good way of me, you know, keeping a pulse on the organization. And 70 calls over a year's time period is, you know, obviously only half a dozen or so a month makes it quite manageable.
Question? You're great.
Hi, gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm Tom Davis. I'm part of Mondelez, and it's a $36 billion startup. And as we build our company reputation, one of our principles is winning with honor. And I think it would be great if you could share with the group today when you were personally faced with adversity, a fork in the road, if you could give a scenario and whether or not you took either the right or wrong choice, and ultimately what you learned from that particular experience, whether or not you chose the right or wrong way, and how that contributed to your leadership today.
You want me to start with this one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, of course, I kind of alluded in my comments to one of my political, paths where I had to make a choice for what I just my core belief in a really controversial issue, and I can't tell you again how painful and agonizing it was to try to decide, because you're getting all this pressure. All the political pundits are saying, oh, you can't veto that, the electorate will go crazy and you won't get reelected. And of course they were wrong as wrong could be. But in the job I'm currently in, I just said that I'm probably sometimes a little slow to react on personnel issues. Actually, on the flip side is I'm pretty proud of the fact that I've identified a couple of instances where individuals that were just simply not, I think, performing and getting the job done on behalf of my members. I had a responsibility, even though I actually just hate, HR kinds of issues. If I could not deal with them, which was what was great about being governor, because I really didn't have to, but now at an organization as small as ATA, when it's time to say to a senior person on my team, it's time for us to part ways, I'm the one that gets to do that. And as much as it pains me, I identified a couple of instances where I simply did what I knew I had to do, and personnel issues are awful, but it's part of leadership and responsibility is to sometimes do the tough business.
Yeah. I mean, I'd use my example of really failing to pick the right person, the right time in a particular job. I had the person in the organization. I actually went outside the company twice and made mistakes on both of those before I then got smart enough to realize I had the right person right here. And even though it was a big jump for that person, when I finally brought on one person, they failed, brought on another person, they failed. I went to the internal person and they rose to become a great leader of that organization. That was probably the most difficult thing, is making those wrong decisions and then having to live with them, but finally getting it right. But I had 2 strikes. I told our CEO at the time, 3 strikes and I'm out. Fortunately, I didn't get to that. We got it right finally on the third person. But that's probably an area that I would point to for me.
Great, thank you.
Well, I've been told that we got to wrap now, but I first of all want to thank you both again, and Don also, for a great session. And one of the things that we're talking about right now is how mistakes lead to success. And one of the things that echoes through a theme I just want to point out to everyone is that sometimes I think as humans we want to succeed without mistakes, because mistakes are painful. The reality is, without the mistakes, we can't succeed. And you've proven that with your comments today. And every good leader I've worked with has been willing to make those mistakes and admit to them as part of that learning and part of that success. So wonderful. Why don't we, one more time?
Thank you.